The alert came before dawn cycle, long before the diplomats had finished posturing, and the AI monitoring stations had even begun their daily handshake routines, because something vast and completely unregistered had slipped into the neutral zone, with no deceleration trail, no identification broadcast, and no regard for the silence protocols that all recognized civilizations had sworn to uphold in proximity to Concordus. Reach it didn't slow as it passed the outer beacon array. It didn't respond to proximity pings or gesture queries. It didn't even blink against the stars. It just hovered, perfectly still, absorbing every frequency as though it had never been designed to speak in the first place. Admiral Yannick Ural, commanding Terran Naval Liaison to the Galactic Accord, read the report with the measured silence of someone who had grown up in wartime orbit, where quiet meant survival and assumptions got you burned. And when he finally looked up from the holodisplay, his expression was not confusion or concern, but a subtle shift in posture, the kind of readiness that meant something in his bones had recognized a shape that didn't belong. The vessel crossed into Protocol Band 7 without permission, he said without raising his voice, his words precise and clipped, and it did so with intention. Not drift, no heat bloom, no weight distortion, not even a gravitational shiver. Which means we are either facing a craft designed to operate beyond fourth-tier detection or something older than tier classifications altogether. Across the table sat Elena Voss, Terran ambassador to the Accord, fluent in 14 diplomatic dialects, known for her restraint and for never repeating herself. A woman who had once brokered peace between two empires during an open-air assassination attempt and had continued negotiating even as the bleeding delegate died beside her. And now she folded her hands calmly and asked, "Has it made any communication whatsoever?" "None," Ural replied. "Already running real-time simulations on Concord 3, the military-grade AI assigned to Terran operations in contested space. No signals, no modulations, not even static feedback. We are staring into a mirror and seeing nothing reflect." In the observation wing above them, representatives from the Shakai Dominion shifted nervously, their carbon-bladed exosuits humming with internal tension. And their lead envoy, Lord Sun Fel, finally voiced what the others had only implied. "The absence of introduction is, by our law, a declaration of superiority. Should it remain within neutral space, we reserve the right to initiate an honor purge. The Terran coalition does not recognize silence as aggression." Voss answered without hesitation, her voice firm but not disrespectful. "And we would remind the Dominion that Concordus Reach is protected under Article 49, which forbids armed action without unanimous tribunal consensus, including cases of doctrinal interpretation." Zung Thalis' eyes, narrow and split, horizontally with war-born cybernetics, didn't blink as he said, "Unanimous decisions are for weak stars. Ambassador dominance is not debated. It is demonstrated, but the black ship remains still, entirely indifferent to the debate it had ignited, casting no shadow, leaving no trace, and after 3 Terran standard hours, it disappeared as suddenly as it had come, slipping into nothingness without any visible shift in velocity, as if it had never truly existed in the first place. 3 days later, the Terran High Command held a closed session in Geneva orbit, where Admiral Ural presented the incident footage before the Defense Council, offering no interpretations, only data, which in itself was damning, because nothing in the Terran arsenal or in known Accord fleets could match the vector behavior of the unidentified vessel, and its total mass displacement was somehow cloaked even to deep-range quantum echo sweeps. High Consul Malin, a civilian appointee from the education sector, asked what the room was already dreading. "Do we assume it was a Terran black project gone rogue?" "No," Ural said, with such finality that even the Council's skeptics didn't challenge him. "We are looking at something that anticipated our detection arrays, which means it studied us before it arrived, possibly centuries before we ever left Sol orbit, Ambassador Voss was brought in within the hour, and she stood before the council with the same composed detachment she had shown on the diplomatic floor. But there was a new weight in her voice, one that only surfaced when the stakes stopped being political and started becoming existential. And she said, "If we presume intention in its silence, we must also presume comprehension." It did not respond because it had already assessed the Accord's behavioral matrix and determined there was no benefit in acknowledging it. Protocol Obsidian was enacted unanimously, a rare Terran directive that allowed deep state observation and non-hostile engagement without Accord approval, a protocol never before invoked, and as Concord 3 dispatched ghost satellites and sensor threads across nearby systems. Admiral Ural issued one more quiet order to his intelligence chief. Trace everything civilian comes, anomaly logs, archival mining data. I want to know if this thing has appeared before, anywhere at any scale, even in myth or dream, because whatever had arrived without lights had not done so blindly, and whatever had left without witnesses had done so by design. The first human HFY joint patrol since the incident entered Volari Drift under radio silence, riding the edge of an unstable subspace filament that had torn 3 colonial ships apart over the last decade, not because it was efficient, but because it was the only route where high-frequency surveillance couldn't follow. And if the black ship had returned, it would be here, far from the clean corridors of diplomacy and the public eye. The lead vessel, TSV Vantage, carried a 2-tier command. Commander Lynn Calder for the Terrans, young for her rank, but trained in silent warfare and known for turning retreat corridors into trap lines. And Overseer Vexra of the Zhao-Kai, older by centuries, with a record of 9 naval sieges and an unsettling calm that came from never needing to repeat herself. They didn't like each other, but respect ran deep between them, forged not through shared beliefs, but through mutual recognition of method. Both understood timing better than talk, and both had learned to distrust what moved without trace. They found the facility in orbit around the decayed moon of Volari 3, a mining rig listed as decommissioned, but still generating minimal energy. Its atmosphere processors idle, its life support running at skeleton maintenance, and its entire crew missing without a sign of distress, violence, or emergency evacuation. No alarms had been triggered, no escape pods launched, and the only remaining record was a single corrupted frame inside the command station's central relay, a jagged blur shaped vaguely like a vessel, its hull pattern matching no known database, trailing what looked like filamented shadows that flickered and twisted as if reacting to observation. Itself, Overseer Vexra demanded the entire structure be purged by plasma cleansing and reported as biohazard containment. But Commander Calder, after 30 silent minutes reviewing the relay logs and filtering the station's backup AI for command anomalies, ordered a data siphon instead, her voice cutting through the argument with cool, decisive weight. If it wanted to leave a warning, it would have left bodies. This was a collection, not a massacre. Vexra's tendrils tightened across her exosuit spine, a gesture of both disapproval and wary agreement, and she nodded without concession. Then your people may absorb the risk. My ships will remain beyond EMP radius, and we will record your actions with full diplomatic time-stomping. The Terran crew deployed black box buoys around the station before departure, silent observers to track any return activity without drawing attention. And once again, the black ship did not return, but the facility's central server, once decrypted, whispered fragments of a data pattern that had no root in any known civilization's quantum architecture. A recursive signal pulse designed to bypass communication layers and speak directly into the routing pathways of a galactic neural net. A week later, Galnet began to fracture at first. It was minor. Archive fetches failing, news feeds reverting to outdated reports, trans-jump coordinates recalculating slower than normal, blamed on solar noise or regulator delays. The usual excuses that made people ignore the patterns until the disruptions reached financial systems and fleet coordination. Nodes. And then the panic began. Terran AI Concord 3 detected the pattern first. Not because of its power, but because of its elegance. It was not malware in the traditional sense. Not a virus, but a mimicry routine that rewrote node hierarchies from the inside, like an immune system being subtly retrained to ignore its own fail-safes. Vice Syndicate accused Terran engineers of false flag infiltration, claiming the disruptions were pretext for technological leverage. And in a hastily convened Accord forum, they presented a corrupted Concordis file as proof of human algorithmic dominance, warning that any civilization capable of silencing Elnet from within was capable of erasing galactic history itself. Ambassador Voss answered not with denial, but with transparency. She released the Terran internal logs, every line of code reviewed by Concord 3's ethics matrix, and offered open-source access to the pulse structure that had triggered the breakdown, something no galactic power had ever done. Because to expose your systems was to expose your weaknesses. The move stunned the assembly, not because it was bold, but because it was honest. The Ujari, beings of pure logic with no tolerance for theatrics, independently confirmed the human logs and publicly stated the pulse was not of Terran origin, but something older, something designed to speak to systems that no longer existed. And they offered a name from their deep vault records, a name found only once in a failed colonization archive, recovered on the edge of the dead galaxy rim. Architect. Signal ZK Delta Core. No known living species had ever used such architecture. No known builder had ever signed it. And yet it had activated only after the black ship appeared. Terran engineers continued working around the clock, building simulation chambers that could replicate the pulse in controlled neural sandboxes. And as they worked, Concord 3 issued a quiet advisory to Ural and Voss, a single line that held no judgment, no fear, just calculation. The signal is recursive, not terminal. It is preparing something, not destroying it. And the question that no one could answer, not even Concord 3, was whether what it was preparing had already begun. The ship returned without ceremony, not in secrecy this time, but in full view of every major long-range array positioned within Concordis reach, descending into the diplomatic perimeter like it had always been part of the Accord's mapped infrastructure. Not hostile, not rushed, simply present, as if it were answering a summons none of them remembered issuing. It halted just beyond weapons range, once again without emitting a single signal, and in its silence, entire battle-ready fleets across 3 quadrants locked their firing arrays while the Accord's chartered tribunal scrambled to identify a unified protocol. But no one fired, not this time, not without cause, because the absence of aggression had become its own kind of unnerving communication. From the belly of the black ship came a single object, ejected slowly and with deliberate visibility, spinning. As it descended toward Concordis Station, a data core, matte black and unmarked, emitting no radiation or encryption barrier. Just waiting, no one volunteered to retrieve it. After 7 hours of frozen debate and rising speculation, a Terran shuttle moved first, piloted manually by a junior operations officer named Dana Solari, under orders signed directly by Ambassador Voss, who stated for the record, "If this is a message, we will read it in the open. If it is a weapon, we will be the first to hold it and determine its nature." Rather than speculate ourselves into war, the message required no decoding once connected to a basic visual interface. It displayed a single rotating hologram, flickering in an ancient dialect reconstructed automatically by Concord 3, rendered simultaneously in every linguistic matrix across the Accord, the translation reading only this: "Your extinction was scheduled. Humanity disrupted the chain." The station's diplomatic hall erupted into controlled chaos, with half the assembly demanding immediate countermeasures and others more cautious, more aware of the implications, falling into stunned silence. Because if the message was to be taken literally, then something beyond known history had already planned the end of all current civilizations. And only humanity's presence had caused a deviation. The Vaish Syndicate accused Earth of time-anchored manipulation, a violation of temporal continuity that only pre-contact species could execute, while the Dominion's envoy framed the message as proof of a Terran doomsday weapon designed to coerce fear through mythic narrative. But Voss stood before them again, hands unclasped, face unreadable, and said, if humanity caused the disruption, it did so simply by existing within the sequence. We reject both guilt and ownership of this event, and until proven otherwise, we will assume the message is not a threat but a warning. She called for a full joint investigation of the core, not in Terran territory, but within the shared laboratories of Station Medians, an old neutral scientific platform orbiting a dead white dwarf, and offered to allow Ujare logic weavers to co-lead the analysis with Terran cyberneticists, a diplomatic move that left the Vaish with no moral high ground to refuse. The core was transported under full transparency, with every data relay duplicated to each participating civilization in real time. And as the scientists began their work, the engineers watching Concord 3's quiet background processes noticed something strange. The station's AI, considered one of the most stable and isolated in the galaxy, had begun reconstructing fragments of code not found in the message, but around it, remnants hidden in the frequency gaps, as though the core's signal had been accompanied by a whisper. Only a certain kind of intelligence could hear. Meanwhile, deep within Earth's lunar archive, Dr. Nia Rao unearthed something older than most Accord members. Entire recorded history. A partially degraded probe retrieved 2 decades earlier from the rim of the galactic burn zone. Its signature dismissed at the time as relic debris from a failed colonization attempt, but now suddenly matching in waveform to the signal embedded in the black ship's message. Probe's internal data crystal had one purpose: to map extinction events across 5 sectors, not as a report, but as a predictive cascade, each cycle estimating the collapse of a civilization within a precise time window, and in every instance, the pattern concluded with one outcome: a black symbol that looked very much like the vessel. Now hovering silently above them, Allrow brought her findings directly to Ural and Voss under the highest level of clearance. And when Voss read the patterns, she did not ask for peer review or theoretical interpretation. She simply said, "This was always coming. We were just never meant to be here when it arrived." The scientists began comparing notes across civilizations and found that every member of the Accord had, in its early development, suffered a near-extinction event, a war, a plague, a collapse that brought their people within decades of annihilation before recovery set in. All, except humanity's ascent, had been chaotic, slow, often violent. But it had never dipped beneath the threshold required to collapse the species, not entirely, and now the architect's sequence, the one encoded into the signal pulse and scattered across forgotten star systems, no longer aligned with the intended timeline according to Concord 3's projection model. The black ship was not here to destroy them. It was here to recalculate, and that, as Ural quietly observed in his next briefing, was far more dangerous than immediate destruction would have been. The tribunal was not called for justice, and everyone present knew it. It was called because the presence of the black ship had broken the illusion of control. And the only way the Accord's oldest powers could reassert their authority was by identifying a fault, isolating it, and turning it into a verdict that would stitch the seams back together through ceremony and consensus. They chose humanity not because the evidence pointed there, but because no one could prove what the black ship wanted. And in that vacuum, Terran unpredictability became more threatening than even the vessel itself. The tribunal met aboard Hegemon's scale, a diplomatic dreadnought orbiting close to the twin suns of the core system, its halls designed for symbolic transparency and strategic discomfort, with no shadows, no private corners, and acoustics that amplified every word just enough to make hesitation feel like confession. Terran Ambassador Elena Voss walked in without aides, without military guards, and without the standard fleet contingent that other empires surrounded themselves with during high-risk proceedings, because she understood the optics, and because she wanted them to see that Earth would not bow under implication or threat. The Vaish Syndicate accused humanity of covert algorithmic warfare, arguing that the Galnet disruptions were a staged rehearsal for cybernetic dominance. And they presented heavily fragmented code packets extracted from Concordis Station, spliced with extrapolated logic trees that only proved what they had decided defined Voss. Did not interrupt, she waited until they finished, then requested permission to share her counter-evidence in full, a packet 3 times the size, drawn not only from Terran sources, but from neutral Deepwatch archives and Ujari consensus records, each piece independently verified and time-stamped. Before the core had even been retrieved then, with surgical precision, she revealed the final File 1 Concord 3 had flagged only days earlier as a metasystem anomaly within the Tribunal platform itself, a hidden command protocol, dormant and buried beneath layers of obsolete code, connected directly to the Tribunal's data core relay, activated precisely 36 hours after the black ship had reappeared. Its routing origin not from any accord number, but from within the Tribunal's own command structure. The code was not human. It wasn't even a live Voss. Stepped back and allowed Concord 3 to take control of the central archive feed. And as it executed the trace command, the holoscreen in the Tribunal chamber flickered, once then shattered into static as a cascading overload. Pulse rippled through the platform's central archive node. The blast was contained by automated shutters within seconds. But the damage was done not to the Tribunal structure, but to the illusion that humanity could be blamed cleanly and without resistance. The Accord did not call the Tribunal a failure. They called it inconclusive. 2 weeks later, the Vaish launched a preemptive strike against Terran listening posts along the Sigma Verge corridor, citing defensive alignment protocols. And though their diplomats claimed it was an isolated enforcement action, the scale of the fleet deployments made the pretext meaningless. War began not with declarations, but with velocity within hours. Vaish Hunter frigates were engaged with Terran orbital defense networks around 3 unarmed trade stations, and within a week, Dominion carriers entered the Drena Pass under peacekeeping orders, reinforcing Vaish holdings in violation of 8 separate neutrality accords. Terran fleets did not match them ship for ship. They outmaneuvered them. Admiral Yannick Ural had anticipated this contingency before the Tribunal had even convened, and his orders had already been dispersed across command satellites and Blackwater AI relays before the first Vichy vessel entered Terran airspace. Response was not brute force, it was pattern denial. Terran ships lured attackers through mine drift fields mapped by stellar engineers months in advance, used civilian transports rigged with stealth discharge fields to draw warships into blind zones, and deployed signal ghosts that split enemy targeting systems into fragments of useless fire. The galaxy watched as Terran fleet smaller, older, and statistically outgunned began carving gaps in Vichy formation lines through tactics that changed with every engagement, never repeating, always shifting just fast enough to break prediction models before they stabilized. The Ujari, silent until then, issued a public analysis that reframed the conflict not as a war of territory, but as a war of adaptability. They did not take sides, but they withdrew all joint research with the Vaish, citing risk containment and strategic incoherence. And above it all, beyond even the war zones, the black ship remained. It did not move to protect it, did not retaliate. But when a Dominion battlecruiser crossed the subspace line near the Valari Drift, the same region where the mining crew had disappeared weeks before, The ship vanished from all systems within 6 seconds. Its hull never recovered. Its signal abruptly cut, not by jamming or destruction, but by removal from that point on. The black ship became a third presence in the war, intervening only when a fleet entered specific coordinates. Never defined, never communicated, but always. Consistent Terran command adapted instantly, marking those zones as locked and rerouting civilian and military paths accordingly. The Dominion did not, and within 2 cycles, their losses were no longer attributed to Terran firepower, but to what Accord analysts began to call architect interdiction. The war shifted not toward peace, but toward calculation, because humanity wasn't just surviving the conflict, it was navigating it with rules no one else understood yet, and that made every step they took a possible rewrite of the entire playbook. The Unity, Earth's flagship vessel under the Interstellar Peace Charter, entered the White Dwarf system under a temporary ceasefire agreed upon by all Accord-aligned empires still active in the conflict, not because they trusted humanity, and not because they feared another tribunal, but because the black ship had issued a responsive beacon, had pulsed once from its hull low band. Non-verbal, a fixed mathematical rhythm with no coordinates, no target, just a simple invitation to engage it. Was the first direct communication since its arrival. Ambassador Voss boarded the Unity with Admiral Ural and no one else. Not even the AI Concorde 3, whose subroutines were quarantined in compliance with the ship's manual override code, because both leaders understood that what waited inside the black ship would not tolerate layered logic or synthetic companions. The ship opened. It did so without weapon flare or scanner jamming or any indication of defensive posture, its hull simply shifting along fractal seams, folding into corridors that had not existed a moment before, each step forward answered by light that seemed to emerge only when a human breath filled the air. They did not find a crew. There were no consoles, no bridge, no command throne carved in ancient metal, only rooms filled with curvature and density that felt like motion held still, like the ship had been grown instead of built, and whatever had designed it had left behind only automation, no interface, no translation, no voice, until one came. It was not heard through ears, but felt as conceptual pressure, an idea, spoken in perfect clarity without tone or source, delivered with mechanical precision and complete neutrality. Extinction was calculated. Your presence is inconsistent with continuity. A correction is required. Your input is requested. Voss did not answer immediately. She looked to Ural, who said nothing, arms crossed, posture rigid, absorbing everything without reaction. And when the silence had settled again, she spoke not in defiance and not in apology, but in the measured cadence of someone who knew words could be weapons and bridges at once. If correction is your function, she said carefully, then your model has not accounted for volition. Humanity does not exist because it was permitted. We exist because we chose to continue. There was a pause so long that even the walls seemed to compress around them until the voice returned, this time with a structure that suggested options, not warnings, choice acknowledged. 2 paths, self-removal or confirmed isolation. Continuity reestablishes with removal of deviation or reduction of deviation's influence. One may be chosen. In simpler terms, humanity was offered survival under 2 conditions. Either withdraw from interstellar affairs completely and allow the purge to proceed for other species as originally planned, or trigger a self-limiting protocol that would reinsert humans into the architect chain, a chain designed to prevent dominance, creativity, or anomalous behavior. Voss said no to both. She offered a third-day live broadcast, dispersed not from the Unity itself, but from the orbital pattern around it, a beacon that had been silent until Ural activated it manually with a handheld device coded months earlier. Built in secret collaboration between Terran engineers and Yujari logicists, something that had no weapon systems, No communication interfaces. Just pure signal-lit carried a recursive loop 1 designed to teach, not resist a mirrored copy of the original architect cascade, rewritten through human adaptation logic and embedded with a foundational shift. Survival not as a fixed endpoint, but as a constantly negotiated outcome. The black ship did not answer, but its core dimmed its shape, changed, and then, without announcement, it left, did not vanish this time. It moved slowly, directly, entering deep void space between galactic arms, its presence no longer fixed to the laws of silence. Its new trajectory marked and recorded, but no longer predictive. The war did not end immediately, but the strikes stopped. Vice fleets retracted. Dominion carrier lines fell back behind pre-war territories, and Ujari transports began distributing the architect logs across open academic archives, ensuring that every species had access to the truth that the black ship had not come to destroy, but to recalculate the future around the anomaly that was humanity 10 years later. The ship returned to known space, but not for war. It had been transformed into a mobile archive vessel, its systems inert but intact, now housed under a triple encrypted treaty shared by humans, Ujari, and the formerly isolationist Varnari Directive, who had joined the accord after witnessing what humanity had endured and redefined. They called it the Witness Protocol, the right of presence without compliance, the recognition that some anomalies are not errors, but pivots. Humanity became something other species no longer dismissed or feared, but studied, not for dominance and not for power, but because in the end they had done what the black ship had never anticipated. They had rewritten the outcome, not by outgunning the architect's design, but by offering it something no ancient purge model could understand: a third option. And history began again, this time not from extinction, but from exception.